Hi, everybody. My name is Brent Roberts. I'm a personality psychologist from the University of Illinois and also University of Tübingen. Therefore, by economic standards, I'm a non-cognitive psychologist, which is a short joke to demonstrate why psychologists hate the term non-cognitive. I, of course, like it because now I can beg off by not having any thoughts in my head. But just to forewarn you, don't use the term blithely when you're hanging around psychologists. They chafe for the most part. I'm here to talk about a paper we just recently published on the PISA data. I took the invitation, which I'm grateful for, as an indication that you would like to know some of the lessons we learned from that data. So that's what I'm going to focus on along the way. This is the paper itself, which was led by Zhang, who did an excellent work, Oynike Wetzel, who's also in Germany. What do? We tested whether a measure that was described in the study as perseverance, which we would call a facet of conscientiousness, predicted math achievement and truancy, which were the outcomes assessed in this wave of the PISA. We leveraged, of course, the amazing data that comes from the OECD in this case, which was 60+ countries and regions and 9 cultural regions. In the 2012 database, you have 500,000 people approximately. You have what's a typical psychological measure of perseverance, which in this case is a 5-item indicator. You have outcomes of math and truancy. The covariates, of course, were the standards, which were gender and SES in this case. This is the scale. I think it's important to look at the scale in this case because it actually is part of the story. It was 5 items. When confronted with a problem, I give up easily. I put off difficult problems. Those are 2 negatively keyed items. It's common for psychologists to do negatively keyed and positively keyed items for lots of reasons, some of them good, some of them not. But it really plays a significant role in the scaling and the measurement process, and it's important to take into consideration. The remaining items are positively keyed items. I remain interested in tasks that I start. If you're a grit fan, that's a perfect grit indicator. I continue to work on tasks and until everything is perfect. When confronted with a problem, I do more than is expected of me. So this is a standard type of measure that psychologists would use to measure something like the Big Five or some non-cognitive skill. Lessons we learned from doing this project. First was to pay attention to construct validity or to psychometrics. So three stories there. The validity of the measure itself, what it meant, measurement invariance, and nuances. So on the psychometric side, one of the things we did and we've taken to doing now is not be, let's say, comfortable with what was measured and what is described as the measure. So it is common in panel studies, and I'm a purveyor of panel studies. I don't collect any of my own data anymore. I like other people to do it for me, especially hardworking Germans who do an amazing job. But in this case, the measure was described as perseverance, but what was it really? And so we have the Big Five as a system, and we can, of course, get obsessive with how many questions we can ask of that, and we have very elaborate taxonomies of the different domains. So we did a separate study with a separate panel with the tools we have nowadays where you can go out to panels in various countries and ask people the same question and investigate it. There's no excuse for accepting what the authors of the study said the measure measured. And in this case, perseverance, which was not described as a personality trait and or the Big Five, it is a measure of conscientiousness, and it is a measure of one particular facet of conscientiousness, which we call industriousness. For us, that's really important because we know, because of lots of other research, what industriousness is really related to. And industriousness is a very good predictor of accomplishment-related or achievement-related outcomes. It's not a good predictor of other things like whether you're self-controlled or the like. So it's really good, and it's a good opportunity for you to investigate things and not accept necessarily what's going on. Beatrice and her team did amazing work with the PIAAC data, for example, but they inevitably had to shorten some of the measures, and by doing so, you're going to constrain or choose, in some respects, what's emphasized. It's okay to go in behind and figure out what it is, and you'll know more about what's going on. We did a lot of work on whether it was one thing, multiple things, doing a lot of work in the latent variable space, looking at measurement. And the best model we found was one in which you had the positive indicators being the main component, and the negative indicators, various times it looked like, and it really might be a separate factor, and we settled on a 1-factor solution with those 2 negative items with correlated residuals for a variety of reasons. But it is very common, especially in non-weird samples, to find those negative indicators floating off as a separate factor. It's just something you want to be aware of, at least contemplate. And then, just generally speaking, the negative items were a challenge in lots of countries, and more so in the non-weird countries. We did a test of measurement and variance by our cultural norms in psychology. This is a question we like to ask. This is the question that's imperative for making comparisons across groups, whether it be gender or age, or in this case, obviously, countries. There are several different systems you can use. There's a structural equation system that we used in this case, which breaks up measurement and variance into configural equivalence, which is whether the factor structure looks the same, metric, which is whether the loadings on the factor are the same, scalar, which is whether the item intercepts are the same, and a strict, which is whether the residuals are the same. This is functionally the same model as the IRT models, if you're more familiar with those. They get you the same numbers, just different packaging, so to speak. We achieved partial metric invariance across 9 cultural regions. We got complete metric invariance among the countries where the negative items worked, but not in the ones where the negative items did not. Okay. And then we didn't find scalar invariance, which means that you should not, at least by the absolutist perspective, compare the means. And I say this both in relationship to this study, but also in relationship to almost every other study ever done comparing non-cognitive measures across cultures. They almost never achieve scalar equivalence, and I'll show you why it's an issue coming up. But it is just one of the things that we've seen repeatedly. It is a relatively problematic challenge for us on a measurement perspective. Within the country, the association between perseverance and math achievement was by everybody's standards here, since many of you are economists, quite high. By our standards, it was average, a correlation of about 0.21. It was also correlated with truancy, which is an inhibition that you skip school, negative 0.13. And it was broadly consistent across different cultural regions. I apologize, those might be too small to see, but these are the 9 cultural and linguistic regions that we use to organize the data at one level of analysis. And you see variability, of course, but pretty consistent, small, by our standards, positive correlations between perseverance and math achievement. Okay, item levels, there's another movement within personality psychology led by René Motis to look at the actual items. So this is akin to what Beatrice was talking about in terms of facets. You can go even lower if you want to and look at the specific items to figure out what's going on, because oftentimes the story might be there, or it might not be. It might be that all the items work nicely, but in this case, one item I give up easily was the item which carried about 80% of the variance when it came to the overall scale. And then you might think differently, of course, about the findings in some respects. A bunch of 15-year-olds stuck in a test who said, yeah, I give up when it's hard. Then they're given a hard test, and they went, yeah, screw it. I give up. And that was driving the correlation for the most part. And that was really consistent across countries. So it was an interesting effort to look at that. The second lesson we learned was pay attention to levels of analysis, especially the possibility of ecological fallacies, which have happened in the PISA data in the past. I'll suspect they'll happen in the PIAAC too. So we saw some indications of this when we pooled all the data. The relationship was pretty much 0 between perseverance and math achievement, which was interesting and somewhat challenging. And then if you averaged, against the better wishes of the measurement equivalence folks, the country level data and correlated it, you got a flip of the pattern within countries and within individual places, such that high perseverance was negatively related to math achievement and positively related to truancy. Here's a figure that shows you the effects. So the lines going across are the uniform positive correlations, for example, at the country level, and then that little blurb in the middle are the country level correlations. And the ones on the side that are dragging it down are countries like Japan, where they have the highest math achievement and an utter reticence to say anything nice about themselves. And so when we give them measures like the Big Five, they tend to say, no, I'm not very hardworking, at least comparatively speaking to other countries. Within the country, the measure works perfectly fine. It correlates with math achievement. But when comparing the country, and this is even after trying to achieve measurement equivalence, all of our efforts at the psychometric level have yet to compensate for some of these cultural issues. And so that's why you see some issues with cultural or country level data that you don't see at the individual level. So it's just to say, be aware of that and be somewhat modest, I suspect. Okay. The second thing, which is highlighted a little bit in Beatrice's talk, was don't worry about controls. The associations of math and truancy were robust to the controls that we had. This is a general finding which we describe as the independent effects model. We found this in the project talent data. We found this in almost every study we've ever looked at. And I know some of you are from different backgrounds, and there's questions about was socioeconomic background, parent background, IQ. Typically, pervasively, those big factors don't account for the role of non-cognitive factors, at least in the personality domain. They tend to be independent effects for the outcomes that we care about. I'm not going to show you that. Okay. Don't worry about curvilinear effects or nonlinear effects. It has been common to put forward the idea that something like conscientiousness or perseverance might have costs as you get too high. You might work too hard towards a goal. You might not give up on something that you can't achieve, math performance in college and the like, right? So if you're not really good at math, you keep on doing it, you're just going to punish yourself, and that's going to then have negative consequences for you. You'll be unhappy, you won't achieve as much. At least this is the idea. We tested that in the PISA data and found predominantly linear associations. The danger, of course, is if you are a small effect size purveyor, like an economist, and you like statistical significance as your indicator of whether something is real, you will find lots of effects, but they're not going to be really, really meaningful effects. At least when it comes to explaining what's going on, or whether that description is apt, that when you get to the higher levels, there's something negative going on. It's never that. It might be at best an asymptote. Okay, and then finally, be humble about cultural effects. So we looked at the different cultural effects, and my reaction to them was not to look at them. Partially because of the issue with measurement and the ecological fallacy and the fact that we couldn't compensate for it with psychometrics. But then when we started looking at some of the specific results, and this is the beauty of PIAAC and PISA data, most of us when we're doing cultural studies will compare one or two cultures, three at best, come to some broad conclusion about individualistic societies versus collectivistic. These data sets afford you the opportunity to do brilliant work, and it also just makes you humble. I would say general finding is the effects are more pervasive than they are different. The kind of simplistic systems that we have, for me, just didn't lend themselves to explaining what was going on. Individualistic versus collectivistic. In New Zealand's individualistic, it was a large effect size. Korea's is collectivist. It was a large effect size. Vietnam is collectivist, small effect size. Estonia is individualistic, a small effect size. So if I were in my typical guise when I had these 4 countries with 4 samples, I'd be writing this treatise about the amazing effect of culture, but this data made me not do that. Tight versus loose, same kind of story. You can find countries where it's tight and it's a small effect size, and others where it's a large and the like. So my reaction to the whole enterprise of comparing country level data and whether it's an explanation of things was to not do it. But I'm a very cautious person when it comes to those things. But I just wanted to at least give you that idea. Okay. To reiterate, perseverance, at least as a non-cognitive measure, is a pervasive, global-wide positive predictor of math achievement in the PISA data. Try to be sensitive to psychometric issues if you can. Pay attention to the levels of analysis, please. Include controls, but don't worry so much about them. Don't worry about nonlinear things, at least with these kind of measurement scales that we use. And be humble in the face of cultural differences. That's what I've got. Thanks.